Hello, and welcome to your lesson for myfreeactingclass.com for Wednesday, December the 2nd. My name is Michael Bean. I am an acting teacher. I've been teaching for just over 20 years now. I've been teaching film and TV acting as my full-time job since 2002, so 18 years. I run a couple of different studios, and I teach teens and adults, and you can find all the information about me just by going to the myfreeactingclass.com website and then clicking the link. That's locating myself. Today, we're going to do a little informal Ask Me Anything session with the folks who are here, and I know we have some folks who've got good questions. I also want to share something with you because as I'm going through the world, taking in all sorts of information and always processing it through the lens of like, is this useful for me as an actor? Is this useful for me as an acting teacher? So I've talked about the work of this woman, Brene Brown, before. I just am very, very inspired by the work that she does on vulnerability. She's a professor of social work at the University of Houston in Texas. She has a TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability. That's one of the most watched TED Talks of all time. It has tens of millions of views, something ridiculous. She has a documentary or as a special on Netflix. So she's all over the place these days. But her definition, or the social work definition of vulnerability, is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, which when I first heard that, I was like, that's what I want good acting to be. Uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure. That's beautiful. Like, that makes so much sense to me. And so if you want to experience the work of people who are experts at being vulnerable, then I think you go watch interviews with very successful actors, people who've put in tens of thousands of hours of practice being vulnerable. If you want to learn about vulnerability, and particularly if it's something that you are personally struggling with and you don't want to go to therapy every week for 6 months, although really, probably a good idea to do that too, just throwing that out there. Then exposing yourself to her work in particular gives you a really solid framework. And it's not acting specific, but her work, she's talking about, here are the barriers to vulnerability. Here are the cultural barriers, here are the personal barriers. And what we want is for our work, I think, as actors, to be full of uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure. Like, when you, the actor, are not quite sure what's going to happen, then the experience for the audience is that they watch more closely. I don't know if you've ever heard this, an old theater actor saying, which is, don't share the stage with an animal or a small child, because typically people will just watch them more. They'll be like, oh my gosh, what's it going to do? Is it going to pee? Is it going to bite someone? Is it going to run away? That level of unpredictability, that level of we don't know what's going to happen, is very focusing for people's attention. And so I think the lesson there should be that's very, very effective for actors. They can bring that level of uncertainty. And I think that actors, especially at the beginning, I see in my classes, actors feel uncertain and they decide that this must mean that they're not a good actor, that something is wrong, that they're doing it wrong. And so the journey of getting acting internalized in your body is often one of building that tolerance for uncertainty. And most of the folks listening are probably already there at it up to a certain point. You're like, yeah, right. Sort of civilians, non-artists, have this much tolerance for uncertainty, but then, like, the more arts you do, really the higher your tolerance probably is, because you're like, yep, I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm going to try it anyway. Yeah, I've never done that before, but it sounds exciting. I'm going to try it anyway. Not sure I'm going to pay my rent this month, but it'll probably work out. All of that tolerance for uncertainty, ends up being, I think, a personal and professional asset for an actor. And it's one of the things that somebody who engages deeply with acting carries forward into everything else they do in their life. So with that idea of sort of practicing something into you, I wanted to share a clip from this week's podcast. So this isn't Brene talking. This is a guy named David Eagleman. I'm going to put the link into the window in case anybody wants to check out this podcast. So David Eagleman, he's a neuroscientist. He's an author of this book, Live Wired, Inside the Story of the Ever-Changing Brain. And I think you'll hear this lines up really well with some of the work that I've been looking at around deliberate practice. That idea of what is the most efficient or what is the most effective way to practice a skill until we internalize it. So here's David Eagleman.
We use the term muscle memory, but in fact, it's all taking place in the brain. It has nothing to do with the muscles themselves, but it's the brain, yeah, exactly, burning something down to the unconscious. And once it gets there, by the way, you're really good and fast and efficient at it, but you no longer have conscious access to how you do it. So, the way to mess up a tennis pro's serve is you say, wow, you serve so well. How exactly do you do that? And as soon as she starts trying to explain, she can't do it anymore, because once the conscious mind is trying to figure something out, you can't do it. It's like if I don't know if you play piano or something, but if you start looking at what your fingers are doing and thinking about it, you're dead. You can't do it anymore. When I was younger, by the way, I used to play baseball, and the coach would say, I want you guys to think out there. And I'd say, actually, you don't want us to think out there. You want us to practice a sufficient number of hours that we automatize these behaviors. And then we go out there and
I love that. Oh, no, you don't want us to think out there. You want us to practice a sufficient number of hours so that we automatize these behaviors. So a couple of the things that he said in there that I think line up exactly with this idea of deliberate practice and just what I know in myself as an actor and in the work of the actors who I see practicing the most or the most efficiently, they are internalizing those things until they literally are not thinking about them anymore, and often don't even know why they work. And it's the most apparent when you watch very, very young children. I've said this in class before, but I think it's useful to come back to, is that especially when I first started the school, I taught all the age groups. I taught 5 to 7, I taught 8 to 11, I taught 12 to 17. And the big lesson for me with the 5 to 7-year-olds is that they didn't remember up here anything they were doing. But the ones who came back week after week after week after week, by about a year in, somewhere between 6 months and a year in, they would walk right to the mark, look right at the camera, not fidget around, and here they, as far as they were concerned, they were just hanging out. Like they were just doing what they would normally do. But they got so used to, here's what I do in the space, they just began to do it automatically. And those kids, especially some of the ones that I taught in the first couple of years, ended up occurring for or being experienced by decision makers as so precocious and so talented that they ended up working quite a lot. I think I showed you some video of Christian Convery Jennings, or Christian Convery rather. His mom let me show a clip of sort of his first acting class where he could sort of like hardly get a sentence out, and then I showed his demo and some of the movies that he's worked on. I've had a handful of students, like that, so just off the top of my head. And so I think that as actors, or I see my students very often trying to take both the role of the acting teacher or coach and the role of the actor. And of course, I mean, like I do that for myself. But the reminder that doing the thing is actually just about rehearsing the behavior into your body over and over and over again. And that the understanding of it, I think, is how we shape our practice. But the goal is not to be conscious of every aspect of what you're doing at all times, because likely if that was the case, you would not be able to do it in a skilled or efficient enough way to come across as professional. I know I've just said some very complex things. Do I need to try that sentence again and just kind of like simplify it, or are we good? No, Duke's like, I got this. Candy's like, okay. Right, that let me give you the TLDR version, which is we want to be smart about how we choose to practice. And then when we practice, we want to be just inside of that behavior so that we can get to the point where we're not thinking about those details as we perform. Right? That the understanding of acting, the detailed planning is for before the practice, and that inside the practice, as much as possible, we just want to be focused on that, getting that behavior in our body. So there's that. Now, I said that I wanted questions before we started recording today, and so today's our Ask Me Anything session. Ask me anything. What's on your acting mind? What can I help with?
Well, going off of what you just said, it, two things actually. One is I assume you're talking when you mentioned the kids doing it over a span of a year. You're not talking about the practice of just preparing for one role or one audition. You're talking about your skill as it unfolds over time. Okay, that's what I assumed. I just wanted to clarify.
Of course.
Uh, but come tied to that is how do you do Meisner by yourself in the time of isolation? How do you get across that? And how are you incorporating this box and isolation into your teachings these days?
Mm-hmm.
And
The
what
real.
can we do by ourselves? Because I can't go to a Meisner class anymore. I don't want to until we flatten the curve, you know?
And so just so I can understand some of what you mean by kind of the Meisner practice. I mean, I haven't done a lot of Meisner training. I've done a little bit, but what you're asking about is that like felt sense of connection, and particularly the like moment to moment listening and responding to what the other person is giving you. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, well, Meisner was, yes, in part, but even more on that, you spoke about being vulnerable, and Meisner was just an example of a way to become more vulnerable.
Ah,
So I was using that as an example, regardless of what technique, whether it be Meisner or something, how can you do that by yourself
gotcha.
these days?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of vulnerability practice, the um, I really do think that therapy is highly useful for actors. I had a recent memory of Larry Moss, who is one of the teachers who has been the most inspiring for me, partly because he draws extremely skilled actors from all over the world to take his classes. So I've been very inspired by the peer group in those classes. But also I'm just inspired by his ferocity and generosity. Like I've experienced actors or acting teachers who are one or the other, but he's somebody who really has very clear ideas and is just like ferocious about bringing people's attention back to the work, and also extremely generous with people. And really, he comes across as though he really cares about people. And one of the things that he often says to actors is therapy, and voice work. And I'm like, Candy, are you in therapy? And Candy's like, well, yeah, not enough. We're like, you doing voice work? Well, not enough. Uh, and and sort of it's easy to say as a joke, but I really think that those two tools, because they are things that don't require somebody else, but are genuinely helpful in helping somebody unlock their emotionality, that therapy uh, and voice work. And so then I will add to Larry's, sort of very short list. Journaling has been very effective for me personally, in investigating, and opening up my own emotionality, right? Working through some of the like daily barriers to being vulnerable, right? So I think some kind of vocal practice, some kind of physical practice. I think some kind of like self-reflective practice, whether that's journaling or meditation or yoga or sort of whatever it is that sort of speaks to you, because it obviously has to be something that opens you up, right? If we're talking about like what helps you be vulnerable. But I'll bet that if you investigate, sort of more to your question, Duke, I'll bet that if you really investigate even the last couple of years of your own practice, you will find examples of practices that you did yourself that did help you feel more open, where you did sort of get more feeling or emotional release in them. And so those top level, those are my ideas, but I would also say that investigating, kind of being an anthropologist of your own experience and going, okay, like I know I've felt this before. Like I know it has worked at least sometimes. Where are those times, and what can I learn by looking at my own experience of success in that area? Uh, Monologues can also be really helpful, like especially if there's a particular aspect of emotionality that is or vulnerability that you're interested in opening up or accessing, right? You can pick something that scares you, in a useful way. You'd be like, okay, right, I'm going to pick the character who's shattered, or if actually like being shattered feels easier to me, I'm going to pick the character who's a military general, and is giving a speech to his troops, right? I'm going to pick something that um, for me feels on that edge of very uncomfortable, and give myself that opportunity to practice. So um, that's all of the sort of solo practices, and sort of where I would advise, again, just looking at your own experience for solo practices. And then if you have the option to work with another person, something that I know you said that you're, Duke, that you're not a huge fan of going back and looking at the old lessons, but you might want to watch at least part of the lesson with, oh gosh, why am I forgetting their names? Iana O'Dowd and Jess something. I'll see if I can multitask and find it even while I am still talking to you. But they are acting teachers, and we basically had sort of a little round table, the three of us talking about like, how do we help connect students? How do we help students connect with each other via Zoom? Something that I heard them say was that particularly Anna said something about really making sure that when he's working on Zoom, or when his students are working on Zoom, that they're vividly imagining what the body of the other person is doing, because that they can't see that. And so that's what something that Meisner makes me think of, is like, okay, first, like, am I noticing all those little micro details of what the face and voice of the person who I'm talking to is doing? But also then, like, am I remembering to bring into my own imaginative life what their body is doing? And can I bring that into the scene in some kind of meaningful way? And so if you wanted to practice that, and you had a friend who you can get together and Zoom with and work your monologue or work your scene once a week, great. And if not, there's that website that I showed you all the other day, We Audition. Incidentally, and I'll have the details of this sort of fleshed out soon, but they gave me a discount code. Their monthly fee is like $10 a month, something like that. But anybody who uses this discount code will get 25% off their membership. And they also offered me a, what's it called? Like a referral fee. They were like, and then we'll give you people's first month, and so I emailed them back and was like, I don't feel comfortable with that, but like, how, so could you give people their first month for free so that people could try it? And he said that their system's not set up for that currently, but if you do this and then you email me and say, hey, I signed up, all I have to do is email you them your name, and they'll refund you for your first month, right? So if you sign up for this, then go to there, you put in this code, and then you email me so that I can say, hey, like, here's Candy Sparks, make sure that you refund her credit card for the first month or whatever. So the advantage there is that then you can find a reader. And so then if you don't have a friend, on call, where again, you're like, oh man, like my only availability is like Wednesdays between 11 p.m. and 12, I don't want to ask one of my friends to do that. That's terrible. Yeah. But the beautiful thing is that somebody there is going to be like in the UK, or in a different time zone. There are always people. Like, I've done recordings after midnight, and there's still a whole stack of people on there, some of whom, are newer actors who are on there just like reading for tips. And so, for a couple of bucks, or sometimes just, for a good conversation with another human about acting, you can get in that 15 minutes of practice, and then practice that exercise of sort of not just talking it through, but really looking in somebody's eyeballs. Does that do a decent job of answering your question, Duke?
Yes, please. Can you give me just one or two examples of what you mean by, or what Larry Moss meant by voice work?
Of course, yeah. So I mentioned this woman the other day, Lori Triolo. She does something called Fitzmaurice voice work, which There's also Freeing the Natural Voice by Kristen Linkletter. Right, so basically there's sort of a more speech track voice work, which is about sort of understanding all the musculature and how does your breathing work. And there's Alexander technique can be really, really wonderful. The sort of, I would call the link letter stuff is more speech because it's about, you've got doing different vocal exercises to sort of open up different parts of your mouth, tongue, throat, that may not be sort of open and able to influence the making of sound. One of the things around vulnerability basically is that the way that we avoid showing feeling, in life, which like we have to do most places most of the time, is with muscular tension. And so fairly quickly, those patterns of muscular tension become fixed. And so the idea with voice work is, can you do something that will help you notice, particularly all those little muscles around speech production, resonance, and breathing? And when you do, what often happens, is you find access to feeling. That, like, voice carries feeling, and it's so connected to voice. It's so connected to breath. I haven't experienced a lot of this, but if you have more of like a kind of new agey bent, or if you like that kind of stuff, there's something called holotropic breath work. I think that's the right word. And that's the kind of thing you could go like sign up for a workshop. But basically, that's like somebody doing a facilitated deep breathing exercise with you until your mind goes away. I've talked to people who have had extraordinarily powerful emotional experiences doing that. So if you ever wanted to give yourself an experience of like, oh right, it's not imaginary. That breath and feeling are really connected. Fitzmaurice voice work, speech work, Alexander technique, 3 clear examples of styles of voice work, and the kind of search terms that you would throw into your browser if you wanted to find examples. And there's probably people giving free classes because you've got the world of classes available to you right now. Let me just see if I can, because I'm sure Lori sent me an email about this week's. There it is. And so let me just copy and paste. Okay, so it looks like she's Lori at loritriolo.com. Yeah, and then we've got, I don't know if this link will come through. No, didn't. Okay. And then there's, she does these Wednesdays, copy link. Wednesdays from what time does she do these? 6 to 8 p.m. PST, Pacific Standard Time. So that's today, actually, if you wanted to jump in. So it's to RSVP. Oh, it's just the same email address again. Great. So that's Wednesdays, 6 to 8 p.m. PST. And she's somewhere tropical at the moment, because I don't know, she can be. Like, I can't remember. She's in Indonesia or something. I'm like, yeah, be on the beach with good Wi-Fi. Wish I was teaching my classes from there. Candy or Claudine, did you want to jump in with a question before we wrap for today? Please.
Hey, so I kind of had more of like a comment or an idea. Is
Great.
something I found that it's not like an acting class or anything, but I found it interesting is this, it's on YouTube, Actors on Actors. It's basically you have like really famous actors asking each other about their recent work that they've been working on and talking about like their experience and with their directors. And I just thought that was very interesting, and I started watching some of them. And Because I didn't know, like, I don't know, they brought up different people, but I'm like, oh, cool. Like, they talk about their director here and there, and that experience. And I just thought that was really interesting. So I don't know, just a comment there. And you
Absolutely.
also had mentioned a while back about a friend of yours in California that knows someone with an acting school or something. And I was wondering if you remembered what the acting school is called,
Oh yes,
or is that
that's
okay? Cool.
still in process. I mean, there are a
Okay.
number of. I mean, there's a lot of great acting schools in Los Angeles. And
Mm-hmm.
the I don't know which ones are currently offering classes online. But there's the one of the ones that I've been to is the Chubbuck Studios. The like Ivana Chubbuck has these scene study classes. But then there's a class or a school that is both for adults and for young people that I reached out to recently to see if they would come in as guests, on this program. So that email is actually languishing in my inbox, but they were very enthusiastic and got right back to me. So I will remember to go ahead with that.
Yeah, no, that was just thank you. And also thank you for those one-liner document you sent me too. It's been a second, but I did look at it, so I need to go back and read those because those are really cool.
Great.
Thank you.
And one more thing for folks who've got the chat window in front of them is casting director workshop, and this is Thursday. So Casting Workbook Labs, there's Lewis and Kay Casting are doing a free casting director workshop through Casting Workbook Labs tomorrow. That's worth checking out. I believe they mostly cast out of Toronto, but anytime you can get a free casting director workshop. And I haven't done a lot of investigating on Instagram, but apparently the We Audition folks have been doing live free workshops with casting directors on Instagram as well. So I'll find out more about that and sort of when they schedule them in links and bring that into a future session. So before we wrap up for today, let me just remind you that we have this fabulous gentleman joining us for tomorrow. So Rogi Yu, he's working on Kung Fu right now, which is he just booked something on that, which is why he was not available to join us 3 weeks ago, but he's coming tomorrow. And so he's got a bunch of credits here as an actor, and crew, director, art department, stunts. He played a recurring character on this kids TV show, Mr. Young, for 8 years. He's worked with Bart on the Beach and the Arts Club here, and he's worked at theaters actually across Canada. So I'm excited that he's making time for us tomorrow. All right, kept you a little bit late. That's it for me today. Thanks for coming, and thanks for coming all the way from the UK, Claudine. Nice to see you again. All right, bye everybody.
Bye, thanks.